When's the next reviewing your music? I don't know. Could be next week. Could be the week after. We'll see. I'm a little busy this week, but yeah. All right, cool. Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. I hope you're doing well. And yeah, today we have an exclusive conversation and interview with the one and only Greg Anderson, a master of guitar and, a key member of many bands, some of my favorites, in fact. And yeah, we're going to be talking about Sunn, Southern Lord, and some recently released older recordings that Greg has been a part of as well, and anything else that comes up in the midst of the conversation too. Greg, I appreciate you coming through, and thanks for coming on.
Hey, man, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to start just by, getting into this recent, live studio session recording that you guys put out, the Meta Benevolence with the BBC Six. Can you give us a little bit on the backstory of this performance? Like what, led to this recording, what made it come together, and, what after the fact kind of led you guys to the conclusion that, this needs to come out. We need to put this out. This needs to be kind of like a, an essential piece of output for our fans.
Yeah. So that was an invitation to do a in-studio session with the BBC. And this particular one was the BBC Six show, and a woman named Marianne Hobbs. She has works for the BBC and has a radio show on there, and has been really supportive over the years of Sunn. And
she's been a tastemaker for a while.
Yeah, she's wonderful. She's an amazing person, and so we had some concerts in the UK, and ending with the final show of that tour ending in London at the Roundhouse. And she proposed or sent through an invitation for us to come and record a session for the BBC Six music. And we had previously done a recording at Maida Vale, which is the BBC studios. Several years before, I think it was 2004 or so, we had done a Peel session. One of the very last Peel sessions before John Peel passed. And that was quite, for us, especially at that time too, kind of early in our sort of history, to be invited to do something so prestigious and legendary.
No, that is absolutely legendary. I mean, I kind of want to sit on that for a second, because there are a lot of newer music fans that don't really appreciate the gravity of such a thing, because they don't really understand how historical and how significant John Peel and the Peel sessions were, and kind of pushing new sounds and breaking new artists. I'll say myself personally, as somebody who started to get into what I was doing on YouTube, I wasn't so much into it with the goal of I'm going to be the best critic, the best reviewer. I was really interested in curation in the way that John Peel kind of did it. I was really interested in using whatever I could kind of pull together as a platform to put on artists that I was really interested in. And, John Peel helped put on some of my favorite artists of all time. So, it's incredible that you guys were able to tie into that history.
Yeah, we were incredibly honored to be a part of that, and then ended up being, I think us and High on Fire were the last invited. Yeah, also
another big whoa.
Yeah, I was like, wow, okay, and that was early on too. Early 2000s, when High on Fire was, they hadn't been around for very long. Same with Sunn too. So. That was an amazing. That was amazing that we got to do that. So it was kind of, it was a return to that studio, same exact space, as before, and similar circumstances as far as it's the same mixing desk and kind of the same premise of you go in there and you record live, and it's a live recording, truly in the sense that it's one performance. So there's no overdubs.
Yeah.
And in Sunn's case, we didn't even, there wasn't a second take or a third take or anything like that. We went and did our thing, and just whatever we played and however it came out, warts and all, really. If there were some mistakes, and there wasn't necessarily some mistakes. I think there was some equipment that wasn't functioning exactly how we wanted it at a certain moment, but it was adjusted in the middle of the piece of music that was recorded or whatever. But it's an interesting process for us, because I mean, when we go into the studio, a lot of time, it's a lot of musicians or bands go in the studio, it's like you can go back and you can do something again if you're not happy with it, or there's a chance to do multiple layers and overdubs and things like that to and textures to create the final piece of music and how you want it presented. This is not the case. This is, you're recording live, and they're these very hardcore, strict schedule union workers working the desk that like are in there, and they capture it, and then once they're done, it's like they punch out for the day and they go home. You have to live with it, and that's just the way the session is. There's no time for really any deep analysis of anything like that. We did have our front of house guy, our sound man, Chris Fullard. He had done a few peels. He'd been present at a few peel sessions before, but he was able to sort of kind of help them or sort of make some suggestions on as far as miking techniques or some of the technical aspect of it. So we did have somebody in our corner. And it wasn't, because it wasn't exactly driving blind or letting somebody completely take the reins, but there was no chance for overdubs or anything like that. When we walked out of there, it was like, well, here's your mix, and that's that. and we knew that was the case going in, and that was exactly the case when we did the peel session as well. So, but it was amazing because it was the end of it was the very last. It was Halloween, and it was the last day. The night before, we'd had our the last show of I think about a 2.5 week tour that we had done that included a lot of different places in Europe, and we ended with this show in London, at an amazing venue, the Roundhouse, legendary venue, and we were really, everyone was in great spirits, and in particular. We did the 5 or 6 shows, I can't remember exactly how many it was, that we did in the UK. We had invited the Swedish performer, vocalist, and organ player, Anna von Hoswolf, to support her and her band, to support Sunn on the tour. And
yeah, I presume she was maybe already in the mix with you on that tour, so that she was, and that's how she landed on the recordings.
Yeah, exactly. We love her music, and she's an incredible person, and
right.
and her band was amazing, and so sharing the stage with them every night was a great night of music, and we really enjoyed it, and so we asked her literally, like, I think probably the night before, so if she wanted to join us and really improvise with us at the BBC, and she was totally up for it. And I think that what she brought to the performance and the piece is just amazing. Her voice is incredible, and her keyboard playing is amazing. Well, she played like a synth organ on the recording, but so that was special for us to be able to have another person, because we had, like I said, since it was the end of a tour, there was the Sunn group that had been together, making music and performing for a couple weeks in a row. And then all of us, then we were kind of a well-oiled machine, really, in some ways. And then, so it was nice to have something different to bring to that as well. And, because we wanted to, we didn't want to play, the hits or the cuts off the album, you know what I mean? We did choose a track from our latest record, but we had transformed that track quite drastically over the course of that tour, and that was kind of the idea. Like, let's record how the progression or where the direction this piece Troubled Air was the piece from Life Metal, where that has gone, and kind of showcase that, and so that was, and really a lot of that has to do with like the second half of that piece is features Steve Moore on trombone. And his playing is just so beautiful. So it was, and that's how we'd been performing that piece live with him kind of taking a solo after this just roaring wall of riff and sound. We sort of stripped it down to just a lone trombone playing a solo, and our friend and band member Steve Moore taking that solo. So we wanted to, and that's featured on that track. The BBC. So, but it was a great experience, and we even had a really close old friend of ours, the artist Savage Pencil. We invited him to come to the studio, and he did like a live drawing while we were playing, like of him, absorbing the sounds, and then
it was a multimedia experience.
Yeah, like not necessarily intentional. It's like, hey, this is our buddy, and he's happens to be an incredible artist that has done so many great things over the years, from Sonic Youth and Mudhoney and different bands and stuff. And Sunn done a lot of stuff with Sunn, but he's just a great friend of ours. So it's like, hey, would you and your wife like to come down and just hang out with us? And then he's like, he came up with his drawing. He's like, oh, I drew this while I was listening to the sounds and stuff. So it was really cool. We ended up using that within the artwork and the design of the album. But it was a really great way to kind of end that tour, and and also to have a collaboration with Anna.
Let me rewind for a second on what you were saying earlier about kind of, the process of capturing the sound of in this thing, and maybe kind of broaden that out a bit, because, it's been over 20 years now since since the Grim Robe demos. And you were also kind of alluding to in that part of the conversation about how in the midst of a recording like this, maybe a piece of equipment isn't working to its, perfection or expectation, and it needs to be changed or adjusted or something, changed about it. At this point, you and Steven and anybody else who you're working with on these records, do you feel like you personally have, the concept of capturing Sunn's sound, down to like a science? Or do you feel like, is it still always ever evolving and ever changing, or, no matter how much experience you have doing it, because it is such a unique thing to capture, there could always be something going wrong. There always is some kind of like unexpected occurrence that needs to be kind of accounted for in the moment while you're doing it.
I think it's a little bit of both. It has been, we have been doing this for a long time, and that experience has sort of earned us, some wisdom about, like ways to make this go, or, kind of, we sort of know what we want. We have a better idea of what we want and how to get it. But I like, that's one of the kind of, to me, the interesting and exciting things about going into the studio, especially with somebody new, like a new engineer, or even a person that you're collaborating with musically, is that there's a chemistry there that's created between everyone in the room, and capturing that and seeing what happens. It's really sort of it's experimenting, right? It's like, okay, we don't know what's going to happen with this person that a lot of times when we go into the studio with somebody, we haven't had a chance to work with them before. It's just a friendship, we've hung out and been friends, but actually playing music together maybe just happens for the first time in the studio. Like, a perfect example of that might be when we worked with, we made a collaborative record with the band Boris from Japan. And, we had been friends with those guys and even played shows with them on the same bill or did a tour. But when you get into the room together and start creating the music, that was, the first time that we stepped inside the studio that we recorded the album at, Alter. That was the first time that we'd ever been in the same room together recording. And that's a very different thing. And then you're also, of course, working with an engineer who kind of also takes a little bit of a production role depending on who it is. And so each person brings something in, and then that they're also, when everyone's in the same room working together, that creates its own, a beast emerges from that as well, and that the idea is to hopefully capture whatever that is.
No, I mean, that's definitely like a way of putting it. The fact that so much, I guess, magic, I guess, can come as a result of things being so in the moment. Would you say that's maybe led to recently, I've noticed as you were kind of mentioning some of the collaborations there has been kind of a creative shift in the Sunn output and discography over the years, like certainly since Monoliths and Dimensions, because there do seem to be more collaborations, more creative crossovers, and a lot more live recordings and like bootlegs and, session type stuff as well. Is there something about things being a little bit more, I guess, unpredictable, be it in the collaborative space or the live space, that excites you guys more in terms of like, we got to put this out, in terms of like, I guess, versus more working in more of a solo capacity, or sort of meticulously working over just one single studio recording over and over until you get it just right?
Yeah. I mean, it really, like, if you wanted to break it down to me, like if I was trying to explain Sunn to somebody, and sort of the albums and the sort of trajectory or direction that we've taken, I always say the same thing, which is when we create an album, we try to make it different than the one that came before it. That's sort of, and that started from the very beginning. Really kind of started that taking shape around the White One record, because the first two records, which the first album was the Grim Robes demo, and the second one was called Double O Void. Those records really sort of were very derivative to me, and the point was this, really massive like homage and tribute to the Melvins and Earth. It was like very riff oriented, and I'm very proud of those records, and I love it. And I think I feel like we made our point, and it was kind of like, okay, well, what do we do next? And that's when the White One album came out. We really wanted to take a different turn and do something different. And that's when we started really working with the idea of bringing in different people and different collaborators to sort of take this into a different direction. Just really not knowing where that direction might go, but like, kind of in some ways, I guess, taking our hands off the wheel a little bit, where it's like, okay, hey, there's other people involved here, and let's see where the ship goes with them, steering, or just being in the room, and see where it goes. So and I think that whole concept is really, obviously it's something that we've continued to do, and it really, to me, it makes it interesting, and hopefully, at least for us, it does make it different than the record before. And because I feel like it's like for this group, it's like you make an album, you make a statement, and then it's time to move on, and sometimes that has been part of the reason, or the entire reason, that it's taken us a while in between albums, because it was like, well, what are we going to do next, and how is this one going to be different? And kind of sometimes it's like, well, who are we and what are we going to do? And like Monoliths and Dimensions for us was like, it was an epic achievement. We spent, it took several years to make that record before, and there's so much that went into it before we felt it was complete, and before we were comfortable with releasing it. And then after that, it was kind of like, well, I don't know what we're going to do next in the studio. And we really sort of, at that point, we really started performing more concerts, and really sort of focused our energy into live performance and developing the group that way. And we really, it took us a really long time to figure out what we wanted to do next and how we were going to do it and everything like that. But it's still, like I said, it all comes back down to me of like, okay, well, let's not repeat ourselves. The music is repetitive in nature. And, sure. You know what I mean? So it's like, well, let's not repeat all these ideas all the time. And let's try something new. And, you know, what ended up happening, after Monoliths was, like I said, we took a long break from recording until we did the collaboration with Scott Walker. And that was kind of like, that was sort of, we didn't know what was going to happen. And that really fell into our laps. And then that was like, oh, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make a record with Scott Walker, and let's see what happens to us after that. You know, it's almost like, it's like this experimentation, you know, like, let's see what this button does, or let's see what this pill does, you know, like here we go. And then we'll see what happens, who we are and what we look like coming out and what we sound like on the other side of it, you know?
Yeah. I mean, dig into that a little bit deeper, because, you know, we talked about, you know, you guys having the privilege to be one of the last artists to, you know, do a formal Peel session. If I understand correctly, like, you guys are also the last artist to put out, you know, like a full-length studio record collaboration with Scott Walker as well.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't think he had the opportunity to release another album after, you know, he put out that album Soused with you guys. You know, so with that record having the time behind it that it does at this point, like, you know, what are some of your reflections on that album, the performance, and how it came out, the distance from it? Has it given you more perspective on it?
Yeah, you know, it was an amazing experience, actually. It was the whole thing was just so strange, and so different than we had ever worked before, because I mean, everything that we've done has been, you know, really sort of the vision of Steven and I, and we've, you know, sometimes there's discussion about what that's going to be, and then sometimes it just happens in the moment. You know, we've been playing music together for so long that there's a chemistry there that creates sounds and music that that just is, you know. So but it's always been we've been very, you know, we're extremely DIY. The only thing, you know, we put out our own records, and we don't have a manager, and the only thing that we've really asked for help on is booking concerts, you know. So everything that we've done is extremely it's DIY, and it's our vision. So this was like, basically, like, this isn't ours at all. This was all Scott Walker's vision. He wrote all the music, and in fact, the demos that he sent us had him playing guitar on them, and he asked us he just wanted us to replace his guitar with our sound. So he had, like, you know, song structures and melodies, and he had it all completely written out. And we were basically, our understanding was that we were going to be hired guns. Basically, we were going to be a backing band for him for his next solo album. That's how it was presented to us. And we were totally, you know, like, of course, we'd never done anything like that before. We had always been the one, you know, writing the music and having the vision of what it's going to be. So letting someone else do that and basically just use us for our services was like a very strange concept, but we were totally into it. Like I said, at that point, we were like, well, I don't know what we're going to do in the studio yet. We created this album that we were extremely happy with, Monoliths and Dimensions, but where do we go next? So it was like, okay, well, this is where we're going next. This is what we're going to be Scott Walker's backing band. Like, you know, kind of super crazy for us, because we were such huge fans of his albums and his work. So
yeah, I mean, for anybody who's not in the know, like, at that point in time, creatively for him, how could you not? Like, especially after Bish Bosh?
Yeah, and Tilt and The Drift before that too. Right. Like, those are the records that, like, you know, there's I feel like this is a similar thing for a lot of bands. There's certain artists that they can listen to in the van when they're on tour that everyone agrees with, that you don't have to put your Walkman on. It's like, oh, you can put this on the stereo, on the van stereo, and Scott Walker was, one of those artists, or one, the Tilt and the Drift, where those are the albums where like somebody was like, hey man, let's listen to this, and they're like, all right, now everyone can agree.
I'm sorry, I have to laugh at that because like the vibe in the Sunn van, the Tilt and the Tilt and the Drift with all the jump scares, because like that's legit one of the old, like some of the only records out there that like actually have like kind of musically speaking like jump scares on them.
Yeah,
like,
yeah, and
we got to throw this on.
It's so odd, but there's some stuff. It's like, well, not everyone wants to hear screeching, obscure Ukrainian black metal
Sure.
at 2 in the morning.
You got to take a break from that.
Yeah, not everyone wants to hear, whatever somebody else, some weird obscure thing somebody's into, or somebody like doesn't want to hear Willie Nelson or some country thing that the other guys listen to. So everyone's got their headphones, but then it was like, hey, why don't we all have a nice, listen to this. The Scott Walker, that was one of the things we could agree on, but it was something that both Steven and I were really into and love. So being asked to do something with him it was for a long time. I kept on thinking that somebody was putting us on, like it was going to be it was a joke that somebody finally was going to, hey man, I was just messing around. There's, that guy's never going to play with you guys, or whatever. So we were really kind of, we were open to whatever was going to, to whatever happened. And, that was kind of a cool, it was an interesting experience to put ourselves in that position. And working with him ended up being completely, it was amazing. We got along really well, and he was really impressed by what we were doing and what we brought to the recording. And to the point where we finished early, actually. We finished all the pieces of music that he had written and that he had sent us demos for. And then he's like, hey, I got this unfinished demo. Would you guys be interested in listening to it and help me finish it? So there was a track on there. I can't remember which one it is now, but where we finished it with him in the studio. And so it was a great experience. It was a really, but very different and strange in a lot of ways too, but I think it was, I'm glad we had that experience. And, the really weird thing is that a lot of people don't know about that record, and was that we never heard him sing one note the entire time. That the demos didn't have his voice on it. It actually had a Fender Rhodes keyboard that was emulating the melody of his voice.
So his vocals were not on the demo? The demo were just like his guitar bits?
No, man.
Oh.
And then when he got in the studio, we're like, oh, I guess we'll hear him sing in the studio. And like once, maybe I don't know in what order this is going to go in, but we'll track something.
Did you and Steven recreate the instrumentation first and then he sang over it, or was it together?
So we recreated the instrumentation, and that was it. He never sang one note in the studio at all. He was just there kind of almost like, in a producer role. Observing and directing. I mean, there was actual conductor and this guy basically that was sort of, I guess, like the liaison between his musical ideas and the, and us. And he would like tell us what to play, what notes to play and how to play them and what speed to play them, what tempo and with what kind of feeling and, like an orchestra conductor. So that was cool. And then, we asked him at one point after a couple days, we're like, oh, when are you going to do your vocal? He's like, oh, I do. That's the very last thing I do every single time. So we had already left. The studio's closed up and we were gone.
Wow.
And I'm not kidding you, man. I didn't hear the vocals until the final album was in my hands. And it was like, whoa, like this is really strange, because that's not to me really like how I was used to, doing collaborative projects with somebody, you know what I mean? So it was it was a trip, man. And honestly, I didn't really like it. I was like, wow. I preferred the other records that, Bish Bosh and Tilt and The Drift and his solo records. I just thought it just seems so alien to me, and disconnected, because it was like we had this amazing time in the studio and he was kind of helping with direction there. But then when it came down to the final product, what came out, the final album, it was totally different from what I had envisioned or what I was hearing in the studio.
Yeah.
So a really strange experience. And what made it even stranger is like, hey, if you're the backing band for somebody and you're kind of like, for lack of a better word, hired guns, that makes sense. But we had such a great time in the studio and had such a great rapport with Scott that he made a suggestion. He said, you know what? I think we should call this Scott Walker and Sunn, and make it like, that's how it should be billed, or written on, that's how the artist should be. Not he made it a specific decision to not make it a Scott Walker solo record. He made the decision of, hey, are you guys up for this idea of it being the Scott Walker and Sunn, basically a true collaborative record? And we were like, yeah. But then none of the process that we were, used to, or the way we thought collaborative albums would go, like when we did one with Olver or Boris, where everyone has, everyone's ideas are shared and considered and part of the album. But this was just solely his, except for, like I said, that one track that we helped him finish, which would have just a few little parts on it that we had written, but everything else was all his vision. So it seems strange to me, like, when he suggested it, we're like, okay, great. And then, it was funny. We even asked, like, hey, so can we sit in on can we be part of the mix when you mix the album? And he's like, absolutely not. I'm going to use my guy and I'm going to do this. And we were like, huh, okay. And then Steven, this is all happening in London, and Steven was living in Paris. I lived in Los Angeles. So Steven was like, yeah, I'm going to see if I can go to at least the mastering session. I can hear this album, because we still haven't heard it with his vocals. And again, we were denied access to the mastering session.
Wow.
And you just kind of, you roll with it and you chalk it up to like his eccentricity, you know what I mean? Because he's an interesting person. I mean,
his vocals are very particular, and you have to imagine that he is maybe very sensitive about how they sound until maybe he gets them just right.
Totally. And I can understand that. And we talked to the producer. There was a producer that he worked with and that was there. And we talked to him, like, when before Scott would show up or something, we kind of like, see if we could get a little more tidbits of information about what working with Scott was like, because he's a quiet guy. And he's like, oh yeah, it's like when he records, like no one is allowed in the studio. I'm the only person there. And he has his room that he works out of, or his vocal booth. And I'm not even allowed in there. It's like, he's very, very private and, specific about how he does things. I was like, okay, I could I understand that. But then, like, even to the process of like, okay, well, you're not allowed to be involved with the mix at all. And you're not allowed to do go attend the mastering session. And Steven, did all the artwork for the album. So it was kind of like, we were involved in some things.
Yeah, in some ways.
In some ways, for sure. Absolutely. And our sound is on there,
yeah,
absolutely.
For sure.
But I wouldn't call it, I think it should have just been a Scott Walker solo record. And his backing band happens to be the guys from Sunn. I mean, there's percussion on there too, and that's not a Sunn member. So,
sure.
There's other elements on there, other instrumentation that was not part of Sunn. And so I think I just kind of think it was, to be honest with you, like, I think it was misbilled. I think it should have been a Scott Walker solo record.
Wow.
And so it was kind of, the whole experience was, I mean, it was a learning experience too. Like we were sponges, we were like, when we were in the studio, we just were soaking it all in and, taking it all in and digesting it and really, using it as a learning experience, which is what it was. But what ended up coming out was like, I don't know. It was so different. And like I said, a little bit alien to me versus what I was hoping for or thinking it was going to be. That, to me, my takeaway from that whole thing was the actual experience of working with Scott versus what ended up coming out of it, which is interesting because a lot of the collaborations we've done, my favorite part of it is what the document is and what the actual album is. Like sometimes you kind of forget what happened during the recording or, it's just so in the moment, but you're like, oh wow, this came out even better than I thought. Like the Altar record with Boris. It was like, wow, this came out like just as a fan of Boris and of, like, man, if I wasn't in this band, I would listen to this record. I think this is cool. This sounds great. I mean,
personally, that's one of the more expensive records I own because I blew a bunch of money on it while it was out of print. So
yeah. And that was a real elaborate project for us too, like the packaging, and we were kind of, we went way over budget on that one and we just went for it. And it's been hard to get back into print, but there has been some discussion about doing that. Cause I think I really like it would be great. I like that album, but it was like, same with the Ulver record, that final album, like listening to it, I'm like, wow, this turned out way even cooler than I thought it was going to be, but with the Scott Walker thing, I was like, I had such high hopes and expectations, and it was kind of like, man, this isn't not what I thought it was going to be at all.
I mean, as somebody who's listened to your guys' music for a long time, I have reservations with the record myself, but like, it is an experience that I wouldn't erase or wouldn't want to have heard.
Absolutely. This gets talked about a lot, and I get asked about it, and I'm always like, God, it's like, I don't want people to think that I'm, ungrateful for what happened or anything like that. But I'm just being honest with you. Like, the experience was incredible. Meeting Scott was incredible. Him telling us about being on tour with Jimi Hendrix and the Monkees, like that was just like, it was just like, it's mind blowing. And, but what the music that ended up coming out on that album, I'm like, I don't listen to that music, like I'm not the kind of person, not that there's anything wrong with it, but I have a hard time listening to my own music a lot. It's like I kind of do it, it's done, and then I just move on, and so sometimes I have a hard time going back and listening to things. But that record, I don't put it on. Like, I'm like, oh yeah, I want to put on this record and remember some things about it. It's like, it seems kind of to me, like I said, I keep on saying, it's very removed from what actually happened in that London studio for a week. You know what I mean? So
I want to get into just a couple more, quick topics before we send you on your way. Again, I appreciate you coming through.
Absolutely.
You were talking earlier about, sort of your earlier records, your earlier Sunn projects, kind of, making a point and then kind of moving on from there. Like, what do you feel like either Sunn in general, either Sunn or just you, because obviously, your creativity goes into a lot of different outlets, and has gone into a lot of different outlets, and will probably continue to go out into different outlets over the years. But, at this point, what do you feel like is there in terms of either Sunn or just you personally, as far as like stones unturned or still points to be made? Like, what points in the near future do you feel like, still need to be made, or you'll be attempting to make?
As far as Sunn goes, I don't know. We're kind of in a position right now where we're like starting to discuss what we're going to do next. And we're really in the early stages of ideas. actually I've done a lot of, since COVID or whatever, I've done a lot of home recording, which is something honestly that I really never did in the past. It was always, to me, my musical output and what I did musically was in a room with people. And I never really did a lot of practicing or, home recording and 4-track recording, any of that stuff at all, ever. But I got a digital 8-track recorder for Christmas on the 2019, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to finally teach myself how to use a recording device and record some of my ideas, and that was, and so I started doing that, and I really enjoyed it. Now I'm like totally into it, making noise and sounds and recording them and demos basically. So I've just started doing that with coming up with some ideas for Sunn, but so much. Dude, it's insane how much has happened in the last 2 years with everyone, emotionally and spiritually and everything like that. Especially, really close people to us have passed, and just dealing with all that and dealing with this new, with the new reality of where we're at, and not being able to perform live, really. Has just, it's really interesting who we are right now. And I think for Sunn, it's always like, I think every album is sort of, it captures a moment in time or of where we are as people as well, and that's definitely what Life Metal was capturing the mood and sort of aesthetic or vibe of where we were at that time. So I think it's going to be really interesting to make a record now and see what happens and see what it is. But I don't, like I said, I don't have any clues to what that direction or what it's going to be or who we're going to make it with, or if there's any collaborations. I've simply have just like been plugging away in my garage with some ideas, recording them and sending them through to Steven. And that's how we're starting basically right now, and seeing because we've never actually, that's never been the case either. We've never sent back and forth. And this is the longest we've gone without seeing each other. I haven't seen him since February of 2020, when we finished a little batch of European shows that we did.
So literally just as the pandemic was starting.
Dude, I mean, we played in Italy at the end of January, and me and the bass player Tim got really sick. And I usually never get sick on tour.
Because at that point, it was spreading in Italy. They were having
and we had all the symptoms, man.
Wow.
We both, and it's funny, we both when we got home, and then all of a sudden it just exploded, and we started hearing about more and more about it, and more information was out about what was going on and what it was and what the symptoms were. And so both of him and I got antibody tests, but came back negative. So I don't know if I had or not, but I'm telling you, him and I both had all the symptoms. And like I said, and him as well. He's like, dude, I never get sick when I'm out on the road. So it was a weird thing, but yeah, that was the last time we ended up doing this really amazing kind of residency at this venue in Paris as the last dates on that run of shows. We did 3 nights in Paris, and each night we tried to present some different music or a different approach or different lineup even of Sunn each night. But that was it. And that's the last time I've seen him, other than like, a random Zoom call here and there. We've decided to, we've done that. But so that's really strange, right? It's like,
right.
It's very weird because, that just never happened before. So I think it's going to be, I'm actually pretty excited about making some music now after all this time and seeing, and everyone's gone through a lot in their lives. And so it'll be interesting to see what that is, what comes out of that, but I don't know what it is, but for Sunn. But then I've also been working on a lot of my own stuff. I got, I got asked to do a score a movie, and recently called VHS 94, which is like a horror film. And I'd never done that before. And so it was such a great experience, like just working solely, it was solo, it was all my own ideas and developing those ideas. Basically, I started, making demos in my garage. And then I ended up working with this guy locally, this amazing producer, Brad Wood, and sort of he helped me kind of realize and flesh out these ideas with real studio gear and great microphones and all that. And so I did a score for this film. And then I ended up doing a collaboration with this woman, Petra Hayden. Okay. And yeah, her and we did six songs, 6 pieces of music together, and her vocals are just unbelievable. She's an incredible vocalist. And so we've got that, and I'm planning on putting out both those recordings are coming out will be coming out on Southern Lord this year, actually. So for the first time ever in my life, I've done more recording and writing of music than I ever have, and I feel like that's something a lot of musicians have been doing that during the pandemic. But that's kind of what I've been up to, and it's been really great. And I think I'm also excited too for Sunn, because since I've been working so hard for the first time ever in my life on my own stuff, it's really sort of, I've learned a lot, and I've been able to explore a lot of different musical ideas. And I'm excited to bring some of that wisdom, to the next thing that I do with Sunn and with Steve.
Yeah, I mean, just to flesh that out really quickly, Petra Hayden, daughter of Charlie Hayden. Yeah. Obviously legendary bassist. She's done stuff with the Decemberists too, and a lot of different artists. So that's going to be a pretty interesting, crossover.
And it's not, sorry to interrupt, but it's it's really kind of come full circle, because Petra actually did vocals on the second Sunn record, Double O Void. Oh, back in 2000, so
that's a fun fact.
Yeah, I was also in a band at that time called Goat Snake, and the vocalist Pete Stahl, he was really good friends with Petra, and so she sang on a Goat Snake album. And there was a time period, the Double O Void record was recorded at the same time as the second Goat Snake record, same studio, same people, the Flower of Disease record. So it was kind of like, hey, we invited Pete to come and hang out with us at the Sunn session, and he's like, man, what about having Petra, on a track? Could you guys be into that idea? She likes what you guys are doing. We're like, oh my God, we were huge fans of her father and his work with Ornette Coleman, and we're just like, oh man, this would be great. And she's just a super cool person too. So and it really kind of brought an interesting kind of element to an approach to the music, made it put in a different kind of light in my eyes. So we'd sort of, we'd worked with her way back when, and then we kind of reconnected with her when Sunn came and played a show in Los Angeles in 2019. We invited her to join us on stage for some improvisation, and she did, and she played violin, and also which she's an incredible violin player, and then she did some vocals. So we had that experience, and she was just over the moon. Like, she just thought it was just like the greatest thing to be on stage and play with us with this just massive wall of sound. And so we kind of had it in mind, like, oh, we should do something together again. And then, so when I had this idea of making some of my own recordings, I invited her to join. And so the recordings that we made, I'm really excited about them, and I'm really excited to share them with people. They're really, it's pretty different. It's very heavy and it's very guitar based. But as far as what I'm playing, but it's kind of, it's a little bit more, I'd say there's more movement and rhythm, than Sunn, but
Okay.
it's still riff based. There's gigantic, mammoth riffs in there, and then with her vocals as well. But I really tried to create, and with the producer Brad Wood, I tried to create like, there's shorter pieces of music too. It's like there's 7 minutes long or shorter sometimes, and I really wanted to kind of experiment with this idea of creating songs. And Brad is kind of more, he's well known for producing Liz Phair and Sunny Day Real Estate, you know what I mean? And even Smashing Pumpkins. So he's coming from a totally different background and way of thinking. And it seems like a very odd fit, and that it wouldn't work, but I like his approach and his understanding and his enthusiasm for what I was doing. And what, really it came from Sunn. He came and saw Sunn. He's like, oh, I can't believe this. I was like, I'd like to work with you guys in any capacity. So I was like, well, hey, I got some ideas. I've been banging around in my garage. Would you be interested in checking that? I was like, yeah. So we kind of formed this relationship working together. It's been really, I'm really excited about it. And working with Petra too. He had worked with Petra before. Petra had a group with her. Petra's one of triplets. It's the Hayden sisters, and they had a group called That Dog. And That Dog, he'd produced one of their albums in the 90s, so he was familiar with Petra and stuff like that. So, but it was just kind of this idea of like, let's create, from these heavy guitar drones and wall of sound and riffs, let's create pieces of music like almost like like songs, and with that are more structured than, say, where Sunn is more free and open.
I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I have to open up this one last maybe can of worms before you go, and ask you really quickly about the Engine Kid reissues that Southern Lord has just come out with. To anybody who's not familiar, I mean, obviously you and Steven collectively have been a part of a lot of different bands and recordings through the 80s and 90s. And I wanted to ask you first off the bat, Engine Kid, this band that you used to be in, what about this band and these records, out of all the projects and bands that you've been involved in over the years, did you feel like I need to go back and dig into this, reissue this, reframe it and put a spotlight on it because there's something about it that needs to be brought back into the light of day?
Well, yeah. Engine Kid was interesting because at the time in the early 90s when we formed the band, I was coming out of out of the punk and hardcore scene, and each band I had been in had been, really sort of derivative and formulaic hardcore punk rock, and you followed the rule book and you did things a very certain way. The song structures, the tones, the lyrics, all the ideas, the entire aesthetic was really sort of planned out. And Engine Kid was the first band that I was ever involved with where we decided to turn away from that or just do something different. Like, let's not do that. Let's try to do something unique and create our own thing. And, we definitely had our influences and our, sort of our guides along the way. I mean, we were very, very, very into Slint at the time. And
some of those spoken word passages on the record definitely written.
Oh yeah. Like, but I mean, to me, it was like when I heard Slint, it blew my mind. I'd never heard anything like when I heard, I heard Spiderland, around when the album came out in the early 90s. And I had never heard anything to me that was that dark and powerful. It played in such a different way. I'd never heard music like that. And I still to this day, I think it's very unique in a piece of music and a band, and what they created. So I was very influenced by that, and really the dynamics, the whole juxtaposition of playing extremely quiet and whispering, and then playing extremely loud, and using that as like a tool of expression for your music. We were really into that whole idea and concept. So, but it was really this whole sort of thing, like of throwing out the hardcore rule book, and really sort of, it was a bold and brave move at that time, because you're young and, you really care a lot what people are thinking about what you're doing. And you want to be part of this community and this scene and be involved in it, and to make music that is maybe not going to be recepted very well or is different from what people are wanting to hear. That was brave for us at the time. And that was the first time in my life that I ever did that. I really kind of stepped out, and that really has been something that I've tried to do my entire life, with every group that I've been in. Some bands have been more traditional, like Goat Snake, one band we mentioned. I mean, it's essentially a heavy blues rock band,
Sure.
It's very slow and heavy, but it's very derivative of Sabbath, and it has a formula that's following, but it's its own thing. And I think we created our own character with that. But really, like, Engine Kid was a time in my life too, that's where I met Stephen O'Malley, and where we really became friends and started exchanging ideas, first exchanging music, like, hey, have you heard this obscure Swedish death metal band? I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I'd be like, hey, have you ever heard Kaspar Brotzmann, the German experimental guitar player? Or have you listened to Miles Davis, Bitches Brew? So we were exchanging ideas musically, with like turning each other on to different music. And then we was like, well, we got to play some music together. So that was kind of during that time period. I mean, that to me was, one of the most important things about it was that it really sort of helped, create the path that I'm on now, Yeah.
I mean, those records really do kind of seem formative for you in a lot of different ways. I mean, to your point, like, there are elements that are obviously influenced by other artists that were very popular, sort of, making waves during that era. Personally, I'll say, like, a lot of that post-hardcore from that 90s decade is some of my favorite music of all time, be it Slint or like Fugazi or something like that. And, and I hear some of that come up in these Engine Kid records, but simultaneously, as familiar with that era as I am, I can't really name any albums that are in that style during that time that had guitars on that were as fucking heavy as the ones that you have on the record.
Yeah.
And it's like, and it's also kind of formative in that way, because it's like, thinking of that, era of work and all the bands that were popular and what they were doing, like, you guys sort of made that dynamic function, but like the guitars are just absolutely crushing.
Well, and that's the other, to me, the other real important thing, or the takeaway from that group is experimenting sonically, because again, these hardcore bands that I was in the 80s and in the early 90s and other, what I did then, you never really cared about your tone or your sound. It was like, hey man, whatever I can afford or whatever somebody's going to loan me, that's what I'm going to play. And it wasn't necessarily about, you weren't concerned about sonics, how things were sonically. It wasn't part of the equation. It was more sort of the either the message of the music or expressing yourself through that music. That was the most important part. And being part of a scene, and a community that was, supporting that. So with Engine Kid, it was like, well, we're going to do something different from that. And I got really into, I've always been really, really into the Melvins, and that was a huge influence. And going to those Melvin shows in Seattle, Washington in the mid to late 80s were mind blowing. It's like they were playing through as much gear as they could possibly get their hands on. And it was a physical experience. Like, it wasn't like you go into a show and you could maybe one of the instruments, you can't hear the bass or you can't hear the guitar or whatever. It didn't matter because everyone's jumping around and, having fun. The Melvins was like, it was an assault on all your senses. And it really left a serious impression on me, where I was like, oh my God, I mean, I can feel the guitar, and so that was what, like that really changed my perspective, my perception of music and what I wanted to do. Like, I wanted to do something like that. So Engine Kid, it was kind of like, that was something we brought into that, like this, experimenting sonically too. Like, because we'd never done that before. Like I said, I just had the bare minimum to get by with any of the hardcore bands I've been in. So it's like, okay, let's get not one cabinet, let's get 2 or 3 cabinets, and like, let's string all this stuff together, just like we saw the Melvins do. Or, another one would be like, like Dinosaur Jr. or we saw My Bloody Valentine early on. It was like, holy shit, this is amazing to be able to feel this music, and other than just like, visually watch it or to hear it, you're actually feeling it. I remember going to see My Bloody Valentine, and my clothes were just shaking. It's like, it was really strangely attracted to that, and just thought it was just incredible. And it's a different way, just it made it even better. So that, that was something we were trying to do with the Engine Kid, was okay.
I agree, and I'll say, like, I greatly appreciate you guys in your own way for it, just to get on a personal note, for recreating that experience in your own way, because I know that maybe like one of the first times you and Steven had ever heard of me was when that video I did where I was talking about my experience seeing you guys live, and that was actually one of my first viral videos.
What show was that?
It was the 08 or 09 Masonic Temple show.
Oh, wow.
So you guys were like, you had pretty much every piece of equipment that you could possibly have there
on that stage.
And I was up against the stage, and like at the peak of volume during that show, my glasses were shaking off my face, and like
right.
my glasses were shaking off my face. My teeth were rattling in my mouth. And at that moment, I can't remember how long you guys were playing, but it felt like it was 2 hours in that moment. It felt like it was 2 hours. And like in the very last moments when I was feeling that intensity, and this was toward the very end of the show, I felt like I was going to die. And then just as I felt like I was either going to die or cry, just all the amps just turned off and all the sound just turned off, and it was just over. It was just like, instantly silent, and it was just done.
There was some power and electricity issues in that building. What an amazing building, though. The acoustics and the resonance.
I've seen you guys numerous times, and like the sound that was able to be generated in that building, it definitely created a different vibe.
Oh yeah, it was a very strange building with some ghosts. If in my opinion, like it was just, you walk in there and you're like, some shit's gone down in here. You know what I mean? Like we snuck around like into some of the upstairs area of that building. Wow, it was unbelievable. We found some crazy rooms in there that look like, definitely we shouldn't be in. And they didn't want, they didn't know we did that. And I think they if they found out, they wouldn't have been happy about it. But really interesting building. But the power in that building was garbage. It was like, and we just overwhelmed that place. I remember I went and saw Sleep there too. And it was the same thing. It was like, they had some issues with the electricity in that building. It was very old. I don't think I don't know if there had been much updating going on in that building, but very special moment to play there for sure,
Yeah. Oh, well, look, I appreciate you again for coming on and having this conversation, and just being an open book, and just really kind of spilling on everything throughout the whole talk. It's been great. Thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you, man. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
All right, me and everybody else who's watching is looking forward to your next output, be it solo Petra stuff, movie soundtracks, Sunn stuff. Just let us know when it's dropping.
I will for sure, man. Thanks for your support.
Yeah, no problem. All right, thanks.
Okay, yeah, take care, man.
All right, bye.
Later.